right, welcome to our final lecture, Lesson 12, Cyber Terrorism and Information Warfare. I hope you've enjoyed the course so far. Let's finish strong. Okay, so what are we talking about here? My buddy is a colonel in the Air Force, and he was talking to me, and he said, there's basically, when you boil it down, there's four ways of, demonstrating national power, right? So the United States, the strength of the U.S., the strength of whichever country. And the four ways that you can kind of impose your will or, be the superior force or, whatever, is through one of these four mechanisms. Diplomatically, obviously very familiar with that. We got the UN, we've got, peace accords, we've got, visiting dignitaries, all these things in an effort to, come to terms on the way things work. Now, it doesn't always work. If you look at what the current definitions are or international norms for what constitutes an act of war, when it comes to that, it's very easy when you have a kinetic, soldier ground force type war on what is considered act of war. But when you're dealing with the cybersecurity space, it gets very vague. It's very difficult to do attribution on who is conducting those operations and on whose behalf, right? So diplomatically is usually the first course of action, and you can do things, like alliances and those type of things. Now, another instrument of national power is information, right? And this is right in our wheelhouse, information security. So this can be done in a couple different ways, right? But this is like you can have intellectual, like research information, like you can have the vaccine to COVID before any other country. You can have the development and the work of the atom bomb, the H bomb, right? So, information is power, as we talked about in the earlier class around espionage, right? So the third way that you can impose power is military, and this one's quite obvious. You invade, you take away, areas of power for the enemy, strategic targets, whatever, a coup, whatever you want. Like military is fairly obvious. And then the fourth item is economic, and this is like embargoes. This kind of blends into diplomatic, right? So you can have embargoes where we're not going to trade with a certain country, we're not going to sell something or buy something from a certain country. You can have sanctions where they have to pay fines and stuff like that. North Korea has been heavily damaged economically from the international theater, if you will, or the international collective. And that's part of the reason why they run campaigns for financial gain, cyber attack campaigns for financial gain. So these are the four instruments of power. But when we're talking about, industrial espionage and, geopolitical level espionage, it will come into each of these, right? So I just wanted to call those out to begin with. So we're going to talk about cyber terrorism a bit today. It's spoiler alert, it's basically just like terrorism, except you use a computer. We'll talk about information warfare. We'll spend quite a bit of time on that. I'll give a couple examples of a cyber terrorism scenario. I'll probably pull up a couple that come to mind of examples, and then, kind of really outline the complex impact cyber terrorism events could actually have, right? So cyber terrorism, I said, terrorism is basically like attacking or scaring or shocking, an entity, whether it's a group of people, a country, right? 9/11 was a terrorist attack. Well, cyber terrorism is using computers or the internet or some type of technologically connected piece of the internet to affect those terrorist type attacks. So, 9/11, they flew planes into a building. Imagine if you had like a distributed denial of service attack, or even if the DNC, like in 2016, the Democratic National Convention, like their emails got hacked into. It's claimed it was Russia. I don't know if they ever got attribution on that, but that's kind of like a terrorism attack. There's been all sorts of concerns of a cyber Pearl Harbor, you may have heard it called, where there's an attack on a critical infrastructure like our financial system or our energy system, and it just blows out and wrecks the United States for quite a while. So yeah, some ways that this terrorism can manifest: significant economic damage, right? So to put it in perspective, imagine, if you will, that the New York Stock Exchange got hacked and it was being manipulated, and there wasn't a lot of confidence in the actual system itself. It could be devastating. And we saw in 2008 when the housing crisis happened, the banks were, I mean, this had nothing to do with cyber, but the banks were like overextending themselves and they got caught essentially. And a lot of banks went out of business. So when something disrupts the financial apple cart, it can have serious consequences, right? Even the stock market crash in the late 20s, people lost their everything, right? So it's not far-fetched to think of a cyber intrusion, an attack on kind of the United States financial system, resulting in something equally devastating. Disruption to communication. So with cyber terrorism, you could actually kind of like pair some of these things. So just to take another example from history, on 9/11, downtown New York, obviously a lot of people inside the Twin Towers, there were so many people trying to make phone calls either to get help or to find out if someone they cared about was okay, that the entire phone system basically gridlocked. It was overloaded, and because everybody wanted to use it, nobody got to use it, right? So that obviously is frustrating and impedes any progress. First responders were unable to necessarily coordinate and communicate with each other. But if you intentionally attack the communications in a military target, if you disrupt communications between the front, the forward army and the back support group, you might be able to cut them off and have a tactical advantage, for example, right? So communications are absolutely critical, right? Now, disruption in supply lines, this is another kind of military-focused one, but think about this if you will, right? So pretty much everything runs on computers now and networks and the internet and stuff like that. So imagine if you are a forward operating, group of soldiers or army or whatever, and you're waiting for reinforcements, for supplies. You don't have bullets, you don't have food, you don't have gas for your vehicles, but they're coming on the supply line. Well, someone hacks in and doesn't necessarily cause damage, but they reroute your gas to, like you're in South Carolina, they reroute your gas to Virginia, they reroute your bullets to Florida, right? You get the picture here, right? Like it could really screw it up, and now you've got a big hot mess that, like, the people who need the resources don't have them, the people who don't need them have them, and they need to get them back, and that takes time, takes money, takes effort and stuff like that. So definitely a targeted impact of terrorism, if it wanted to be, right? Degradation of the national infrastructure. So I wanted to get to this bullet specifically. Just recently, and if you didn't catch this in the news, I'd encourage you to Google it, because it was just like a few months ago, basically, or it was in 2021. The Colonial Pipeline, which basically runs the petroleum, gasoline, whatever you want to call it, through the southeastern United States, was attacked by a ransomware attack. And it was mostly their IT systems, not their OT or operational technology, which actually controls the movement of the gas. But they were hacked, and people lost their mind. If you lived in the Southeast, or even part of the central eastern United States, you may have seen long gas lines or gas stations running out of gas altogether. People were losing their mind, and this was just a hack of an oil and gas company that, I mean, it didn't stop production, right? But people were losing their minds. So as you attack the infrastructure, you can certainly cause serious damage, right? Like if you were a Jack Bauer 24 type level bad guy, I mean, maybe you attack the power grid in the summer in Texas, right? Texas just had that freezing cold situation. They couldn't deal with it. Imagine, if you will, that it's not, 110 degrees in Texas heat, and you take out the power to all of Texas, right? People are gonna die, right? People are gonna freak out. People are gonna start hoarding, goods or assets, or just kind of a breakdown of society a little bit, right? So you can seriously do some terrorism-like damage by attacking these type of targets, right? And all possible via the internet. That's so true, right? You don't have to physically be there. It's easier sometimes if you're physically there, but for the most part, you can be comfortably in a country that doesn't extradite and, reach out and touch someone, if you will, right? So the United States specifically can definitely expect and to be a victim or target of cybercrime by advanced persistent threats like the nation state threat actors, who are highly funded, highly skilled, highly motivated, given orders to attack. And we defend every day, right? The DoD, NSA, DHS, like they have cyber warriors who all they do is kind of defend and protect, but it's hard, right? It's hard to defend all the doors when the bad guy only needs to find one unlocked door. So how serious is this threat? It's pretty serious, but let's look at some examples here. I told you they can cause economic attacks, or that's one way you can influence power, is attacking the economic stability of the country or of the state, or whatever you want to call it, sovereign group. So you lose files, you lose records, you delete. Imagine, if you will, I think this was the plot of like Mr. Robot season 1. Imagine, if you will, that like the big mortgage lenders lost all their records on who owed money for mortgages. Like all of a sudden there's no mortgages. No one has any of that. That, I know that's a bit far-fetched, and they do cover it in Mr. Robot exactly how you could do it. But like, just think about just the sheer impact of what that would look like, right? Destroy data as well, which is kind of like the same thing. But I'll tell you, you can even manipulate data. This is even more damaging. Most people think about just like smash and grab, but think about this. What if you hacked in and you changed everybody's mortgage and you added, I don't know, $25,000 to everybody's mortgage, or you changed everybody's credits, not everybody, but you changed people's credit scores from 800 to 400, or you ever see the Sandra Bullock movie, The Net? I think one of the students put it in the discussion there. That example is not that far-fetched. They totally rewrote this woman's life. She was a felon, which she really wasn't. She had outstanding warrants for arrest. She owed money, all these things, right? So you can manipulate data to severely impact a person, a group. You can write fake emails and then stick them in their email. That way, when there's a data recall and the media gets a copy of the emails, it says all this terrible stuff that you said, even though you didn't. Right? Obviously, money can be stolen from the account. That's quite obvious. This happens all the time, right? This is probably one of the most, next to ransomware, business email compromise resulting in the transfer of funds outside of a business is one of the most common attacks there is. It's like on average $75,000 an attack, multi-billion-dollar annual crime. So this one's actually quite serious. But typically, this is more a means to fund your cyber operations. Like, you steal money so you can either personally be rich, but if you're more of an organized collective, like an APT, you're doing it so you can bankroll your actual operations that you're doing. Yes, and then the time the IT staff spends cleaning up. This is something that a lot of people don't think of. Like when you're responding to an incident or you're cleaning up after an incident, you're not actually working on improving your program. You're working on stabilizing it, right? So that's wasted cycles, because I assure you, most people don't build a project plan and have time in there where they're just cleaning up incidents. Think about this, right? Just to take another example from 9/11. The towers went down. It took like 12 years to rebuild what, buildings they did build in place of where the towers were, right? I mean, that's a massive amount of time. There was financial impact to the United States economy because of 9/11. So it's not far-fetched to do a more intricate, a more surgical type of attack than kind of a crude crashing of a plane into a building with the cyber type attacks. All right. So any organization want to do harm could set up a group, right? Absolutely. You could have this is just a collective of people that you could have. Basically, what this slide's getting to, and what we're going to be talking about in a minute, is you don't have to be like a lone wolf. Very often, that's like the 1980s style. Like, you don't need to be a lone wolf. You could just be the architect, the mastermind. I want to attack this organization or this country, right? And then you assemble effectively like an A team, right? If you remember that show from the 80s, where you got specialists in each area. So you got a coding person, you got specialists in getting access to things like, username and passwords. You got a social engineer who can get on site. You've got a networking expert who knows how to like configure the routers and the switches and stuff like that, to allow you to kind of move around. Like all this, you build an A team, no big deal, right? So just to give a kind of an example here, like a scenario, if you will, right? We've got 3 different teams who are going to execute this attack, right? So you set up a fake. So let's have a couple different teams perpetrate an attack, right? So first we need some funds to run the operation. So we set up a fake e-commerce website. It says we're selling PlayStation 5 for $200. Everybody's going to want to buy one, or, $300, whatever, like a sweet deal, like limited time only. And basically everybody's putting their credit card in, and you're just stealing their credit card information, stealing their bank accounts if they put that in, right? And then I don't know why you would post it on the web anonymously. Like, that's just kind of a jerk thing to do. But like in this scenario, you post it to the web anonymously, basically exposing all of these people's information. So now they have to deal with the situation, and maybe fraud's perpetrated on them, maybe identity theft, maybe some crime. But in reality, what really would happen is this team would set this up in order to facilitate getting access to funds to do whatever attack you're going to do, right? Whoops. So team 2 is creating a Trojan. We remember Trojans from week 4, malware, I think it was. And, like, it's an app you download. It makes getting business cards wicked easy. It makes calculating the tip for a check across like 5 people super easy. Whatever it is, it's a classic Trojan, right? And then in this example, it's going to delete key files on a certain date, which is, if you recall, a logic bomb. So this one's just kind of a malicious thing. But if you can get this in 500 million downloads or whatever, and you were able to break 500 million people's phones all at the same time, you could cause quite a panic, quite a stir, especially if you tied it to some other event, since you know exactly when this is going to happen. Team 3 is creating a virus. They're going to do a distributed denial of service on a financial website, like, whatever, Coinbase, Robinhood is quite popular, right? All this is happening on the same date, right? Teams 4 and 5, they've got a footprint in a major bank system, so I guess they're inside. And Team 6 is going to flood the internet with false stock tips, okay? So this is basically staging up kind of a cyber terrorist event where they're going to cause mass hysteria and panic, right? And it's all kind of tied around individuals' money, right? So you do the flood on the internet stock tips, people are flipping out, they want to get access to their money. Distributed denial of service is keeping you from logging into your thing. You got a footprint in a major banking system, so you can, cause all sorts of havoc there. People whose credit cards was released online, maybe people are using their credit cards to purchase stocks. So you can see it's a bit chaotic, right? It's very terrorist driven. Now, taking a tip from the, biological space, right? There's weapons experts out there that typically, can be used on the black market as basically subject matter experts. You see it in action movies all the time where they get the scientist and they're like, build me a bomb, right? And okay. Usually they're not complicit. They're being forced to do it. But the idea is, why wouldn't it work out the same way, where if you're a criminal organization or a terrorist organization, ISIS, for example, right? They're the terrorist organization that comes to mind. Why wouldn't ISIS find cybersecurity experts who are interested or aligned to their cause and have those people kind of perpetrate these terrorist attacks? And that's very likely could happen, right? So attacking military targets, right? Let's talk about that for a second. If you try to attack like the DoD or the CIA, like the way they do in the movies, they will find you immediately. Not immediately, but they will find you in very short order, and they will get you, and they will arrest you, and you will be very unhappy. This is assuming that you're in the United States. If you are in a country that is either an adversary of the United States or doesn't have extradition to the United States, they will not get you immediately arrested, right? But you definitely don't want to do that. But what you could do is attack a supply chain member of the DoD, right? The government has tons, if you don't know this, tons and tons of contractors who work on, federal systems, federal projects, federal, initiatives, whatever. There's all sorts of non-government people working on government projects, right? So wouldn't it be easier to just attack a private company, get in there, and then leverage that access to gain additional access and take out secrets, or maybe cause some issues in the DoD, CIA, NSA, exactly, right? So one interesting thing about this is that the government has actually been pushing this thing called CMMC, which is like Cybersecurity Maturity Model Capability, I believe. Effectively, what it says is, if you are going to do business with the United States, you are required to implement this, I think it's like 45 different security controls at your organization, and be independently audited and certified that you do in fact have those controls in place, or you're not allowed to win contracts with the government. This is happening right now, like as we're talking. They haven't quite fleshed it all out yet. They're having trouble like identifying like who the auditors would be, because it's big money, right? Like if you have to have this service done, then it's like a guaranteed business, right? So, but the CMMC and the whole mission behind it is actually to help prevent literally this type of attack from occurring. So going through another kind of simulation here, or scenario, as I mentioned before, we're talking about rerouting, food and supplies to different, areas other than where they actually need. This is kind of another play on it, right? So you find, like, someone hacks in and finds out that these planes are flying to a certain base. They find out additionally that a certain amount of food is being sent to a base, a certain amount of soldiers. So, by kind of aggregating these disparate pieces of information, you can begin to see, maybe the secret mission of an attack on some area, right? Oh yeah, so yeah, as I mentioned, you could change the destination of the food, right, to cause disruption, right? The soldiers are only so good if they're supplied and good to go, right? If they're not, they're in trouble. So high security in all military systems, this is fairly common, right? The DoD does have very high level of security for good reason. And no low priority security systems, of course, right? So security systems are the systems that actually put the security around whatever the actual system is, right? So you can't have your security be insecure, or else the entire thing is compromised, right? So no low priority security systems. And these are things like closed circuit TV, intrusion detection system, firewalls, these type of things that we talked about. So general attacks are unfocused attacks with no specific target. You don't have a mission. You're just kind of just trying to scare the masses and attack at scale and in volume, just to have the massive amount of damage, right? The unusable. So I mean, if you took out major critical infrastructure, people are going to be immediately concerned with making sure that they're okay, their base needs are okay, and the people that they're responsible for are okay. So, that I guess that's basically it for this particular slide. Now, information warfare. This is where it's going to get juicy, right? So, information warfare is in a way to manipulate information in pursuit of some goal, typically military or political, right? You can collect information without the other person knowing. You can disseminate misinformation. and we'll get into all of these, right? You can use misinformation to trick your adversary into deploying resources into areas that don't need it. You can use misinformation to kind of change the overall societal view on something, right? We're seeing this right now with like, climate change or even the COVID vaccine, right? There was a certain, I'm not judging, whatever. There was a certain area of the population that thought the COVID vaccine had something to do with 5G wireless. Like like the wireless, not the vaccine, that the 5G towers were actually causing COVID. So let's talk about propaganda, one of many ways to weaponize information. Okay, so we saw it just recently with the QAnon group, right? So anyone can set up an internet news site, right? You can become a poster on Reddit, 4chan, these type of sites, and start posting information. And if enough people want to believe it or believe it, they'll begin expressing it and sharing it. I mean, you can't not look at QAnon as an example of how this can be kind of take hold of a society and kind of drive it. Not the society, but a group of people, right? So a way that militaries can weaponize information warfare in propaganda, right? Tokyo rose during World War II. All the soldiers, you're in a battle theater, but you can get a radio and pick up radio waves, right? So you've got Tokyo Rose, which if I'm not mistaken, was a member of the Japanese kind of contingent and would be saying all these things over the radio about like all the wonderful wins that Japan was having and all the terrible losses that the Allies, the US, the English, Australia were having, etc. So it dampens your spirit if you're behind enemy lines and you're a US person, for example, and it elevates yours if you're a Japanese soldier, right? Like national pride. So actually quite interesting. It's like propaganda with two different kind of benefits to it, right? Radio Free Europe was essentially the Allied powers version of that, talking about massive wins when they had them and massive losses for the adversary when they had those. But you'll notice that they won't spend time highlighting like massive losses for the Allied powers on Radio Free Europe. They might say, moving, whatever. The English have switched priority of taking Berlin for taking, Stuttgart or something like that. Where in reality they suffered maybe a major loss in Berlin and they were actually just retreating to Stuttgart, right? I don't know if that's just a made up example, but you get my point. Right. So language manipulation, like certain words have power, right? So, when we bombed, when the atom bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, right, at the end of World War II, Nagasaki, a lot of people, innocent people, non-soldier combatants were killed instantly, right? Well, you don't want to say, well, we killed a bunch of innocent people, right? So you say there was collateral damage. We took out significant military targets with moderate collateral damage. But what you're saying is civilians were killed as well, right? Starting a war, you wouldn't say that. You'd say we're taking preemptive action. This is an imminent threat, right? So it's all about how you spin, right? It's called spin. So the internet, if you think about it, everybody's got access to it. Even countries that are, in economic dire straits, they have internet access. A lot of people have phones, like Android-based phones are everywhere because they're fairly affordable, right? So people have access. So, there's websites everywhere. Some are bent to one particular agenda, right? And again, it's all about using information to manipulate public opinion or sway public opinion one way or the other to benefit whatever your agenda is, right? You can do this through posting to discussion boards, right? Like Reddit is another popular one. Maybe you're chiming in an echo chamber on like some news outlet about whatever, right? Try to get people charged up. So very, very closely related to propaganda. Also, I might add, as far as information control goes, if a particular news outlet, for example, or website is, let's say pro-war, right, wants to go to war, they're going to invite people onto that channel or onto that website who are also pro-war, right? Or they're gonna invite someone who's not pro-war but has really bad talking points or something like that, so they can kind of demonstrate like, oh, look how poor that argument is to not go to war, for example, right? So it's very much a theater, right? It's controlled on how the information is disseminated, who's giving it, what's the cadence of it, etc. Right. So disinformation. We talked about this in the intrusion detection system lecture a little bit, talking about honeypots, right? Like fake resources. The same can be done with information, right? So we might this was famously done in World War II, right? In World War II, the Allies had just finished crushing Germany in North Africa, right? So the African part of the World War II theater was out. And the next logical place for the Allied powers to go would have been Sicily, right? I believe it was Sicily or Crete. I think it was Sicily, right? Whatever the Italian boot is kicking, like the island that looks like the soccer ball the boot's kicking, that was like an obvious military target, right? The Germans would have known it. The Allied powers know it. But what the Allied powers ended up doing was a really, really brilliant plan where it gets way more complicated. But basically, they took a corpse, right? A soldier who had just recently died. They put him in a flight jacket. They stuck some secret plans into his jacket. Looked like a communication between two generals. He was a courier. And they basically said that they were going to be taking, this other island over here. And, the instruction said something to the effect of, Germany's obviously going to think we're taking Sicily. So let's go take this. And let's make it look like we're taking Sicily a little bit, stack up some forces, get some convoys out there. But all the while we'll be taking this. And then they basically took the corpse and threw him in the ocean, close enough where he was going to wash up on shore in an area that the Germans would have definitely have gotten to him. And what ended up happening was the Germans got him. The Germans got the information. It looked legitimate enough. It was protected, but they got their hands on it, right? So what a stroke of luck. They've got access to some confidential information on the next military target for the Allies. So then they bulk up over at that other island, and the Allied powers just take Sicily or whatever that island was that had the obvious military value, right? So there's some real benefit to disinformation and how you can weaponize it, right? If you just handed them the information, they're going to realize that it's bull, right? So you have to make it seem like it was legitimately being protected and that they discovered a vulnerability or weakness in the system, okay? Here's some actual cases, right? Talking about all the cyber terrorism stuff. In Iran, the armed forces and technical universities joined forces together. And they created independent cyber research and development centers to not only train personnel on how IT works, but also to do security research, see if they could find vulnerabilities and stuff like that. Tehran, it says that they go to Russia and India to get help. Basically, they're reaching out for subject matter experts to educate and train their citizens, their cyber warriors to be, so they can, basically have that capability, right? You can be a small country with low income and be a cyber power, right? Israel, for example, Israel is I would argue one of the top 5 cyber powers. They're brilliant. And it's a little country compared to the United States and China and Russia. All right. Russia for sure has one of the most advanced cyber military capabilities in the world. I think APT-41 or APT-29 is theirs. Fuzzy Bear, you might hear it called, Cozy Bear. Yeah. They hack Chechen websites. They hack Ukraine. If you go back to 2015, where Ukraine's power grid went off, talk about cyber terrorism and taking out critical infrastructure. It's Christmas 2015. Russia knocked them off, knocked their power off. Very cold. I don't know if there were deaths, but there probably was. So, it says evidence is inadequate to predict whether Russia's intelligence services would attack the U.S. Here's the thing. Russia does attack the U.S. I'm sure the U.S. attacks Russia. The thing is, you got to be very careful. It's a slippery slope. The second you say that, like, it's an act of war, like, the gears start turning, and you can't necessarily back them up, right? So do you want to get into an all-out world war right now, right? Does either country? So I think there's a lot of kind of covert ops awareness. Like, none of this is publicized. This is me speculating at this point, but I'm telling you right now, Russia's got a very advanced capability, and so does the United States for that matter. Just some future trends. You look at the date on this, July 15th, 2021, so very, very recent. And there's like tons and tons of cybersecurity bills being brought through Congress, legislation around all sorts of things, from funding cybersecurity efforts to training citizens to, getting like a workforce, not a workforce skill up, but like basically developing a larger workforce, doing K through 12 stuff, making computers almost part of like normal core education. So, as people grow up, like, computers are normal, and then they, like, cyber becomes a whole thing as just part of that culture. Also, like, sharing of information between public and private sector is also part of these bills, because that's a problem that we have. So anyways, there's a lot of legislation going towards this. Especially, you'll also see, kind of tangential, that there's a lot of legislation going towards the international transactions of cryptocurrency, which is, if you've noticed in the news, like, crypto's going down in value because all this kind of regulation starting to be put around it, which is not good for the people who like to use it for money laundering and ransomware payments and nefarious affairs and stuff like that. So if you were going to be, a country, like, what would we do to protect against cyber terrorism? Because no one wants to be a victim of terrorism, right? I certainly don't, and I don't want the United States to be. But it's big solutions, big problems, big solutions, right? It's not like going out and buying an antivirus software and calling it a day, right? We got to build out research and academic programs, much like this program, right? Much like the PhD I went through, for example, was co-developed by the NSA, which is basically like the cyber arm of the United States, right? So they specifically came in and made the program what it needed to be in order to develop cyber soldiers to be effective in the current fight, right? So, but we need more of those, right? So that needs to be an initiative that gets supported, right? Computer crime treated more seriously. This is a slippery slope. There's only like one law. I mentioned at the beginning of the course, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. There needs to be more laws. There needs to have gradations to the laws for criminal persecution. Now, every police department have access to computer crime specialists. This is true. Like that a lot of police departments don't have this access. They have to outsource it and stuff like that. But if more police departments had access to kind of centralized resources of these computer crime or forensics experts, digital forensics experts, you basically could be more effective at detecting and discovering cyber criminal crime, the extent of the crime, and going back to the previous bullet, then you could charge at the appropriate level and punish at the appropriate level. Now, security professionals having a forum to report and discuss emergencies. We already have that, which is great. CISA, the FBI, DHS, there's all sorts of different ways to communicate of an ongoing situation or an incident, right? So when you hear of Colonial Pipeline, I guarantee you that they called the FBI very, very quickly. If you go to ic3.gov, like, that's how you do it. That, like, we could both submit something to the FBI right now. I suffered a computer crime, right? Or I was a targeted victim. It's usually more organizations that submit that, but the thing is, it's there, right? Also, I might point out vulnerability disclosure, which is like, if I'm a security researcher and I find a vulnerability, I can tell the vendor. It used to be very sketchy, like you might go to jail if you did that. But now there's mechanisms in place to allow for the disclosure of vulnerabilities. That way the vendor can fix them, can communicate out to everybody who's got the product, like Microsoft Windows. Like, hey, this problem's out here. Here's how you fix it. We'll have a patch in a week, right? So good stuff. So Tor, I guess we're going to talk about Tor for a second. So I guess if you were a cyber terrorist, the way you would communicate and kind of organize, one way could be using Tor, which is the onion router, which is effectively like the internet, but it's not Googleable. Like you can't get to it from here. You have to have a Tor router. And it's not a router necessarily. It's like a piece of software you put on your computer, and you can go to various sites that are on the onion network, right? So that instead of .com, it's .onion. And the way the software works, you're kind of like bouncing around other people with Tor routers, and you pop out onto these sites that are only accessible through there, right? So there's illegal markets. I think we've already talked about this. Like there's Silk Road is already gone, but the Silk Road was like basically eBay for drugs, guns, murder for hire, human sex trafficking, these type of things, right? So, but you could use, I think the reason the slide's in there is because you can use Tor to kind of be more anonymous and coordinate these type of, terrorist type attack scenarios we've outlaid today, right? So, all right, I know this is kind of a like a high level lecture, right? But cyber terrorism, hopefully you can see that it can come in many fashions. It's not just blowing something up, right? You can destroy from inside by compromising the financial system. You can sway public opinion by having all sorts of crazy, misinformation, propaganda campaigns. People start believing it. The 5G towers giving COVID is like a perfect example. People were literally like cutting down or attempting to cut down or destroy 5G towers because they were convinced that was what was giving COVID, which is obviously scientifically impossible and silly. But that's the point. Like this is how it can be manifested, right? Many experts believe it's a credible threat. I absolutely agree. I would say that the next World War III, it probably won't be called that, but the next real World War will not be fought in a conventional kinetic fashion. There could be some of that, but for the most part, I think it's going to be quiet. I think it's going to be cold, and I think it's going to be done online, and it's going to be both military targets being taken out as well as attacks on critical infrastructure of your adversary, right? So how could your computer systems be used against you and your company? So a question that I typically ask for internal discussion, but since this is an asynchronous class, just think about it. Maybe pause the video and think about how your computer system can be used against you and your company, but I'll tell you, right? You can hit play now. Your computer could be used to spy and listen in on network traffic on your network. It could be used to actually frame you to look like you're perpetrating some type of attack from your computer. It could also be part of, a deployment space for a botnet. So then all the computers at that company, your company, whatever, infected by your computer, are then used in a distributed denial of service attack, right? Obviously, your computer, the place you work, you have a certain level of trust with like third-party vendors. So maybe you connect into them, you infect their machines, right? Exploiting your trust. So that's just one way that computer systems could be used against you. Or your computer system can be used against you and your company. So, all right. I really had a great time this semester. Let me do this. Yeah, I really had a great time this semester. I hope you enjoyed the course. I hope you enjoyed the labs. I thought the labs were excellent and really well done. And if you have any questions, reach out. Please stay in contact with me after the course ends. I really love this field. So if you have any interest in it, reach out. Let's have a conversation. I'm willing to help you get into the field if that's something you're interested in, or I'm willing to talk to you about any, specific niche thing that we talked about during the course of the course. All right. Well, thanks so much and good luck.